Have you ever thought about how a few pages in the front of a book could spark a literary revolution? Well, that's exactly what we're talking about today. We're diving into the story of how a short preface to a 1938 novel became a declaration of independence for an entire generation of writers. This isn't just about a story, it's about how one author, Raja Rao, had to literally forge a new language to tell it.
So let's start with this question, and it's a big one. How do you tell your story? A story that's soaked in your culture, your traditions, your way of seeing the world, when the only language you have to write it in belongs to someone else. How do you even begin to make that work?
That was the exact puzzle facing the brilliant Indian writer Raja Rao. And in 1938, in the preface to his novel Kanthapura, he didn't just find an answer for himself. You see, he laid out a blueprint, a kind of manifesto, that would empower countless other writers to find their own authentic voice.
So first, we've got to understand the core problem he was trying to solve. Rao saw this fundamental clash, this tension, between what he called the spirit of the story and the medium used to tell it.
It really breaks down like this. On one side, you have the spirit. That's everything that makes India, India. The culture, the myths, the whole emotional landscape. And on the other side, you have the medium, the English language, which Rao himself called alien. It had its own rules, its own history, its own way of thinking. And he argued that standard Queen's English just wasn't built to carry the unique emotional weight of Indian life.
And Rao just nails the entire predicament with this one incredible line. One has to convey in a language that is not one's own the spirit that is one's own. Just let that sink in for a second. So if that's the problem, what on earth was his solution?
And this brings us to his pretty radical idea. He decided you don't have to choose between the spirit and the medium. Instead, he proposed forging a whole new path forward, a brand new dialect.
You see, Rao's first move was to just flat out reject the idea of imitation. He said, we cannot write like the English, we shouldn't. It would just sound fake, right? But he also knew they couldn't just ignore English's huge role in India. He was searching for that perfect, authentic middle ground.
And here it is, his big idea, the creation of a new dialect. Now, this is super important. This wasn't about writing bad or broken English, not at all. It was a conscious, strategic, and deliberate act of taking the English language and bending it, shaping it, almost decolonizing it, so that it could finally hold the true weight and flavor of the Indian experience.
And to justify this, he pulled out this absolutely brilliant historical argument. He pointed out, hey, this has been done before. Look, he said, the Americans took English and hammered it into something that was uniquely theirs. The Irish, with writers like Joyce, did the exact same thing. So his logic was simple and totally powerful. It's our turn. Indians must now forge their own English.
Rao also had to push back on this idea that English was completely foreign. He made a really keen observation. He said that for the educated Indian class, English had already become the language of their intellectual life. They were, in his fantastic phrase, instinctively bilingual, switching back and forth between their native tongue for emotion and English for thought. So in a way, it was already a part of them.
Okay, so that covers the what. But what about the how? For Rao, it wasn't enough to just change the words. No, the whole rhythm, the very pulse of the writing, had to change to match what he called the tempo of Indian life. He found his inspiration in India's ancient oral traditions. He called it the Puranic style, which he named after the Puranas, these vast, sprawling, ancient epic texts. Basically, he wanted his writing to sound and feel like a village storyteller, maybe a grandmother breathlessly telling a tale that just goes on, weaving in and out. And just listen to how he describes it himself. We tell one interminable tale. It's not about neat little plots with a clear beginning, middle, and end. It's about this continuous rushing flow, where one episode just tumbles into the next, mimicking the natural rhythm of speaking and breathing.
So how did he actually get that feeling onto the page? Well, he used some really specific techniques. If you ever read Kanthapura, you'll notice it immediately. You'll see these incredibly long, winding sentences that go on forever, and they're often linked by this cascade of and. Now, that's not a mistake. It was a completely deliberate choice to capture that authentic rush and tumble of someone telling a story out loud.
Okay, so let's quickly recap Rao's 4 main pillars here. First, the challenge, getting that Indian spirit into the alien English language. Second, the prescription, don't just mimic the British, create your own distinct Indian English. Third, the justification, hey, English is already the language of the Indian intellectual. And finally, the style, the rhythm has to be fast, continuous, just like oral storytelling.
So,
what's the big takeaway from all this? Why are we still talking about this preface all these years later? Well, let's get into its incredible, lasting legacy.
Honestly, the impact was a game changer. Before Rao, so many writers felt this immense pressure to sound perfectly British. His preface was like a key that unlocked a door. It gave them permission to use Indianisms, those unique local phrases. It told them it was okay to disrupt English grammar for artistic effect, and it showed them how to bring the flavor of their own native idioms right into their English sentences. He essentially blew the doors wide open for a truly authentic Indian voice to finally step onto the world's literary stage.
And all of this leaves us with one final, really big question to think about. What does it actually mean to own a language? Is it about following all the rules perfectly? Or is it about bending those rules, about wrestling with the language and forcing it to tell your story in your voice? It's something Rao's revolution makes us all think about.